Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. First of all, I would like to thank once again George Perrault for his kind invitation and obviously for his the organization of this very, very interesting workshop. To me in particular, it's a great honor and pleasure to present a paper here in Madrid because the Spanish financial history is one of my favorite topics, so muchísimas gracias. Lisbon, London and Genoa. It's a strange combination, strange group of towns, not so common to be seen together, but this strange and unusual mix will be useful to us to understand commercial and the role of commercial and financial center in connection with the history of the Spanish history of early modern. I'll divide my presentation into two parts because the first part will be more qualitative in the sense that I'll try to have a look and present some historical and chronological aspect of this subject, and the second part I will show you some graphs, some data. So the goal of this paper, which is really indeed still a working paper, the goal is to illustrate the Spanish bullion during the reign of Philip IV. From 1627 to 1650, more or less. But in my case, I will not focus on the arrival of the bullion, in the sense of the arrival of silver from the colonies, from South America and other places to Europe, but I'm much more interested in this case in presenting the mechanism of a redistribution of the bullion in the European economic, commercial, and financial market. Okay? So, first of all, some sources, some information about the sources. I both used private and public archives, and obviously I used a lot I discovered a lot of information in the Genoese archives. This is important to underline because not so many research has been done in the private archives in Genoa. But since the last 15 years, we've got a huge amount of information at disposal of a researcher in the private archives. It means archives of noblemen, from the families of oligarchy of the Genoese Republic. So you can see some examples. Then another important source has been found in Archivio di Stato, is the public archives of Florence, but in some private fonts, always families, Bartolomei, Galli, and those Florentine families. Then Venice in particular, with information about the mint of the town. Then we've got something Spanish, obviously, El Archivo General de Simancas, all the interesting fonts of El Consejo de Estado, the Hacienda, the Treasury archives, Secretarías Provinciales, and so on. But always public financial sources. So, other sources, Lisbon, of course. La Casa da Moeda is the archives, the public archives, the historical archives of the mint of Lisbon. The colonial archives, l'Archivio Storico Ultramarino, the National Archives, then London with Western manuscripts, some collection, some books of letters from the English ambassador in Madrid, obviously some information also from the National Archives, and just to finish, Brussels and Antwerp with their commercial archives. Which is our topic today? We are speaking about the Spanish public debt and the money that Philip IV of Spain was asking to a close little group of bankers. So in this chart you can find the volumes of the money which has been borrowed to the crown of Spain, starting from 1626 to the 50s of 17th centuries. Why did I choose this period? Is an interesting coincidence with the reign of Philip IV, but it's not the only cause. The principal cause is that during this period we've got a very interesting, very strong fights and competitions between different players in the credit and financial markets. I mean, a lot of borrowers are involved in the public debt. So a lot of bankers, as I define them and call them bankers, but are a professional figure who's got some different characteristics. They are bankers, they are brokers, they're making insurances, so businessmen, I would call them. And during this period, we just can see a lot of strange political, financial, and economical events. So it's a very, very dense period. Sometimes we have got good condition in the markets, sometimes not so good condition. And the leaders of the market, as you see in the previous chart, has been the Portuguese bankers and the Genoese. Between adding the values of money borrowed by the Genoese and the Portuguese, more or less you've got 80, 90, sometimes 100% of money borrowed to the Spanish crown. So we are talking of the most important leader of the financial and commercial markets. But in this case, I would just like to focus on the Portuguese contribution. It is very interesting because the Portuguese contribution to this public debt is the less studied and the less investigated. But I suppose that in this data, we have got a lot of information. And from this data, we can understand a lot of the financial mechanisms that are ruling the credit and financial market of the 17th century. So just to have a clearer images of a chronology, all this happened during a very delicate period for the Spanish monarchy. We all know that the first problem was the 80 Years' Wars, the Dutch rebellion. So, just to contextualize our problem, I just have you have a list of data of a Dutch rebellion starting at the end of the 70s of the 17th century, and the war finished as the 30 Years' Wars, which is global war in Europe, with the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. I am always using, and I will use a Spanish word, which is asiento, which is the form, the typical form of borrowing of a Spanish crown. So I just try to give you a short, brief definition of a Spanish asiento. The asiento, this typical form of short-term borrowing, that sometimes produce a high level of interest. And another problem caused by this form of borrowing money to the Spanish crown was that sometimes the king was lacking money, problem of liquidity. So another important aspect of this scenario is what the classical historiographers calling the bankruptcies of Spanish crown. Indeed, they suppose that also the Spanish word quiebra would help us to define this as a partial and temporary interruption in the repayment of the public debt. It should be something like similar to an insolvency, much more than a bankruptcy in a closer sense. So, during this, and we will see when, these insolvencies, these quiebras, we assist to a proposal by the Crown, which proposed the bankers to accept as a repayment consolidated stock called juros. So we pass from a floating debt, the asientos, to a consolidated stock. And this habit started in 1575 with the first quiebra of Philip II. Just to have, as I told you before, I'm very interested in the mechanism of payment, this international payment system. So, just to give you an idea of the complexity and also of the agents of a player involved in this game, I'll just try to briefly tell you something about the structure of the treasury, the Spanish treasury, and the connection, relationship between the Hacienda Real, the Spanish treasury, and the private Genoese and Portuguese bankers. So, we have got the Prime Minister, the almighty Olivares, on one side. We have got the Genoese banker on the other side, and then a very, very long list of Portuguese, as we call in Spanish, prestamistas, borrowers to the crown. And you can see a lot of them, the names of a lot of them in these slides. But this structure is coordinated and managed by a strong Genoese banker, which is called by the Crown as an expert on the financial matters, which is Bartolomé, in Genoa called Bartolomeo Spinola, which is the factor general. Just to say, the responsible in name, legal representative of a crown in the negotiation with the borrowers. And I just want to like to underline that between the group of the Genoese, there are at least two different parties. The old Genoese banker, who has been living in Spain since a long time, from the 16th century, probably the second or the third generation of Genoese, well integrated in the Castilian society, and the new Genoese bankers, who are still living in Genoa, got strong connection with the other group of bankers, but they've got their ideas, their proposition, and they want to manage business in a completely different way. So, a closer definition of these different networks is at the center we've got the mighty Prime Minister Olivares, and on the other side we've got old Genoese, Gianluca Pallavicini, principally from the families Pallavicini and Spinola, and the new Genoese groups, and the old Genoese bankers having strong connection with another element very important in the Spanish scenario, financial commercial scenario, which is the Portuguese and the German bankers. So groups of Genoese split between the collaboration with the Portuguese and the German bankers, and a new group, emerging group, and this group really want to do business on their own, with not so many relationships with Portuguese. So, just go straight ahead to the Spanish silver trade. The Spanish silver trade it means what are the bankers doing when they've got ingots in their coffins? How do they spend their silver? Because we know a lot about arrivals, quantities, values of silver coming from the colonies, production, and so on. But not so much is known about how the bankers spent the silver. In this case, I'm referring to bullions. Okay? Bullions. There is a new scenario because the triangulation traditional is and the old route has always been sending silver to Genoa just to have credit and can use this credit coming from the bullion to spend on the financial and credit markets through a new financial institution that I'll just speak in a moment. So we've got Madrid, we've got Genoa, we've got La Casa de la Contratación, we've got Seville when all the treasurers, silvers arrived, but emerged two new markets. The first is Antwerp, traditional old market from the 17th century, but now with new leaders, Portuguese and Genoese bankers, that got their agency, the Genoese and Portuguese living and working in Madrid and signing asientos with the Spanish crown, has got their representatives, their agents, in Antwerp. And now, starting from 1630s, until more or less the 50s of the century, we've got a very interesting and new market for the bullion, which is the English market. These are the books of accounts, the ledgers of the Genoese bankers. You've got another example, just some photos, just to have an idea of sources of documentation I'm using for this work. Then, the bankers need a financial institution to make possible international payments. And these new international payments are the exchange fare. So a brief definition of this. It's a very, very long story. It's not the case to talk a lot about this, but exchange fare can be defined as a credit market through which we can move an incredible amount of money from one place in Europe to another place. So a strong connection, as Claudia was saying before, with, for example, all the commercial activities, but as well with the bullion market. So these fairs are a well-established institution, and it's got its calendar precise. Every 3 months we've got a fair in a predefined town with a predefined working calendar. So it's all well organized. And this fair is marking the time of the international European financial calendar. And which are the principal functions of this exchange fair? Acceptance of bill of exchange, and this is the trick. The bills of exchange is the only financial instrument, commercial instrument, that allow the bankers to move less money, coins in a sense, and much on paper, so bills of exchange. And the invention and the strong work we've got on the attempt to make bills of exchange every day easier and sure, it's a very important aspect of this of this commerce. Obviously, during the work of exchange fair, we've got a renegotiation of new bills. So we buy, during the fairs, we buy and we sell bills of exchange from every corner of Europe, okay? Just go ahead because time is very important. Just a brief scheme, just to resume the position and the relationship, political aspect of the relationship between Spain and England. As the year 1630, England to Spain has always been the enemy. But once an enemy, and now a strong relationship. So starting from the peace, the Cockington Agreement, the sign of a peace between Spain and England, starts a new opportunity for the financial and obviously for the bullion market. So this incredible operation made by the English ambassador in Madrid, it's very crucial and important. But the story is longer, so we have to take into account also the period of the Civil War, of the English Civil War, and the period of the English Commonwealth, Commonwealth, sorry. So we are talking of bullion that should be moved from Spain to England. So let's try to think about this first route. Silver Channel means that starting from the 30s, England has got a new opportunity to buy silver and to have silver at their disposal easily because the Spanish crown, but in this case the Portuguese and the Genoese private bankers has got a lot of billion and they want to sell it. And one of the first and most important clients will be England, the Royal Mint in London. So, the connection from the Atlantic Spanish ports of, for example, La Coruña, San Sebastián, north, to Dover and the other, let's say, in the other little port, all around Portsmouth, for example, and London as well, the Portuguese and the Genoese bankers selling bullion to a syndicate, a private syndicate in London, and this bullion is transported directly on English fleets, on armed boats, from La Coruña, San Sebastián to Dover and London. And then a part of this bullion will be used to help and pay the Spanish troop in Flanders. Okay, the triangulation is from Spain to England, and part of silver is bought by the Royal Mint, two-thirds of silver remain in England, and the other part is reshipped to Dunkirk, which is at the moment a Spanish port. So, we've got the first phase, which is directly managed by the Treasury Ministry, but then we've got the most interesting, from 32 to 37, the second phase, which is most interesting because it's a private business between Portuguese and Genoese bankers and the London syndicate. La Coruña, Dover, Portsmouth, and Dunkirk. And from Dunkirk, it's a very short journey to, very short connection to Antwerp, where the military management of a Spanish troop is made. So the credit and money should reach Dunkirk. And what is interesting, that the part that was bought by the Royal Mint is directly can't see, sorry. Five? Five, okay, thank you. It's directly paid by the silver is paid back with bills of exchange delivered on Antwerp. So the Spanish troops can be paid with part of bullion, which will be mint in Flanders, and another part, the Antwerp operator, brokers, and bankers can receive the bills of exchange from London. So, quick here. Silver production, silver coins production in London. Look at the dates, okay? We've got interesting peaks starting from 35, 37, and then, and the hypothesis is that more or less 80-90% of this production is coming from Spanish bullion ingots, okay? This is very important, 1638, there is the Spanish troop definitely lost Breisach in Alsace, and from that moment on, they have to use another time an old route, which is the easier, which is the Genoese route from bullion, was sent from Barcelona, Denia, Alicante, the Spanish Mediterranean in this case, ports, directly to Genoa. And Genoa's got credit bullion to be used during the fairs and other financial activities. So, this is the silver production. And what is interesting, if you look at this silver coins production in the mint of Genoa, what is interesting is that only a very, very little part of silver was coined, was minted in Genoa. It means that this silver, and we've got a lot of evidence, was sent to other Italian mints, including Florence, including Milan, but I suppose the most important part to Venice. And from Venice, for example, is just a strong connection. We've got a strong connection with the Ottoman Empire. So silver from Spain to Genoa, from Genoa to Florence, from Florence to Venice to the Ottoman Empire. Okay? So this is a very important chart. Another alternative route could be the Portuguese, because a part involved in this game are the Portuguese bankers. And this is the new part of my investigation, because Rita has got a lot of works on 18th century, also on 16th century, but what I was looking were the original data coming from the treasurer's ledgers of the Mint of Lisbon. These are the books, just to understand which is the relation between the silver delivered and received by the mint in Lisbon, and to split between bullion and the entrance of and the production made with bullion and coins. In this case, we are speaking of piezas de 8 reales. Coins, it means Spanish coins recoined. Okay? The darker column is the ingots, bullion. The clear column, clear gray, is the sum of bullion and bullion and coins, recoinage. Okay, this is a comparison between the production of silver coins in Lisbon, in Genoa, and in London. I suppose that I have got no time, so being Genoese as I am, I think that I could just read this. I'm not reading this in Spanish and try to translate in English. It means that love has always been a Portuguese affair. But as soon as some interest came out, love immediately turned to be a Genoese affair. Thank you very much.